On today's show, it's the end of an era as John Wall is going to be bought out by the Houston Rockets. So long, Tank Commander Jonathan Hildred Wall. Also, we'll take a look at the ongoing implosion over with the Brooklyn Nets as it relates to Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and just the dumpster fire that is going on over there with that organization. And as it relates back to the picks that the Rockets own for the next half decade of Brooklyn Nets basketball. And we'll take a look at Kenyon Martin Jr. and figure out what's going on exactly with KJ Martin, see what his role potentially is with this Houston Rockets team moving forward. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. Big show today. Got a handful of topics we want to talk about. First, on the docket will be the biggest news. John Wall bought out by the Houston Rockets. We're going to touch base on that. We'll take a look at the continuing implosion of the Brooklyn Nets franchise with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, all of that. And then we'll also take a quick look at the KJ Martin Jr. situation. I guess just KJ Martin. KJ Martin Jr. is redundant. We'll take a look at the KJ Martin situation with the Rockets as it relates to his role moving forward with this organization and, you know, the likelihood of whether he stays, whether he goes, all of that. So let's start with the big news. John Wall being bought out by the Houston Rockets. Now, this was the thing that, look, we've speculated for a long time how John Wall's, career in Houston would eventually come to an end. And there was some hope, a tiny glimmer of hope last season that maybe a trade would be able to be, formulated to get him out of Houston without having to orchestrate a buyout on this, massive $47.4 million player option at the end of his contract. The Lakers never budged on a possible Wall-Russ swap for the Rockets to be able to recoup an additional asset by, the Lakers procuring John Wall's services. And then you still would have had the same situation because then he would have had to figure out how to buy out Russell Westbrook, and that probably would have been a bit more of a cantankerous situation than it was with John Wall. But Wall has agreed to have his contract bought out by the Houston Rockets. He's shaving $6.5 million off of his $47.4 million salary. So essentially what that means, that's an equivalent amount of money to the taxpayer MLE this summer. And John Wall does intend to sign with the LA Clippers. That was a destination that we tied John Wall to quite often in a lot of speculative trades and trying to figure out how to get John Wall out of Houston. It's a destination that makes a ton of sense for him as a player. They desperately need a veteran point guard, somebody who can go in there and really orchestrate that offense and help set up guys like Paul George, like Kawhi Leonard. And that Clippers team could be quite a handful this upcoming season, assuming John Wall still has something left in the tank, which he showed that he did here in Houston, a year and a half ago? I mean, it's been a minute since he's played. But I ultimately, I do wish all the best to John Wall. Look, and first off, I will say this situation's great for the Rockets because they walk away. They don't stretch his contract out or anything, right? So they're not going to have the salary cap hit on the books long term. They do shave off a little bit of money, right? $6.5 million off that $47.4 million. So John Wall still gets a really nice fat payday. He still gets his $40 million. He's going to get the extra $6.5 million from the contract that he signs with the Clippers, and now he gets a chance to compete. So, with this situation, and like many others before it, with this Rockets organization kind of having to pivot from the James Harden era into now the rebuilding era, they continue, Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office continues to do its absolute best to take care of the players that are, no longer going to be a part of the future of this Rockets team, right? The veterans that have been kind of stragglers, holdovers from the Daryl Morey era or the James Harden era, and they continue to do right by these players and put them in the best possible positions to find success. And I do think that it's important to note, right? This was an amicable situation through and through between John Wall, between the Houston Rockets. Yes, at one point, John Wall was getting a little feisty. He wanted to play. The Rockets offered him, they offered him a role where he could play a reserve role, and he just wasn't remotely interested in coming off the bench. And so that was that. So John Wall just wound up not playing in Houston this entire past season. So I do think, though, that throughout the entire time, Rafael Stone, John Wall, they continued to discuss things. They continued to talk. There was an open lines of dialogue about, okay, we're trying to find a trade partner. We're trying to figure out this situation. And in this situation now, with the way the buyout worked, right, the Rockets didn't have to buy him out right now. They could have waited until much closer to the actual NBA season. They could have, ridden out the timetable on it. They could have tried to find a possible suitor further down the line, somebody who did want to absorb the $47.4 million on his contract and try and take back some salary or some additional future assets, what have you. They could have done this a million different ways. And instead, they orchestrated the buyout with John Wall before free agency got here. That way, John Wall would be able to coordinate with his agents, with other teams, and basically be able to figure out the best possible situation for him moving forward so that he would have a leg up on the competition. And that, again, the Rockets didn't have to do that for John Wall. So this just continues to be another feather in the cap of the Rafael Stone-led Rockets front office of how they do take care of these players so that they can be put in the best possible situation moving forward once they do move on from the Houston Rockets franchise, if they aren't going to be a long-term part of this Rockets rebuild. But just shout out to John Wall, right? He came to Houston during a ridiculously turbulent time in the midst of the, James Harden exit saga. He, came in, gave us some awesome memories. He was part of the wow factor, some cool highlights, all that. He was the tank commander, if you will, for a little while. And I say that out of love, not out of any form of disrespect. John Wall was bought in, right? He came in and he was riding for the city of Houston for the 40 some odd games that he played in that one half season with the Rockets. And even after that, right, even when he was around the young guys and he wasn't actively playing, they were still leeching wisdom off of him when he was around. You could tell that he was very much involved in trying to pass on whatever knowledge he did have to Jalen Green, to KPJ, to the other young guys on the roster. And that's just the type of guy that John Wall is. He's an absolute gem of a person, and I do wish him all the best of luck moving forward. Now the Rockets have, if you're a Rockets fan, right, you have maybe another team that you might be kind of rooting for this next season to see them have some success. I'm going to want to see the John Wall Clippers have some success. Maybe not more so than like the James Harden Sixers or like the CP3 Phoenix Suns, but I do want to see the Clippers have some success. And the Clippers... all the Clippers picks are owed to OKC, right? And so, like, if the Clippers succeed, then OKC's picks plummet a little bit further, or at least their value plummets a little bit further. So that's another reason to maybe want to root for the success of the Jonathan Wall-led LA Clippers in conjunction with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And yeah, who cares about them? But for real, it's, this has been a long time coming. I kind of, about a month or so ago, right? Like, we've discussed this ad nauseum. It felt like a buyout was going to be the one way to resolve this situation with John Wall. It just didn't seem like a trade was going to ultimately come together. And this is how the chapter ends for John Wall in Houston. So with that, I will leave us with one more legendary quote from John Wall himself, the one that we have loved. We've run it back time and time again. But here we go. We'll run it back one more time from the legend, the icon himself.
Team wasn't where we wanted to be, and we had people that didn't want to be here, so it's kind of hard to play through that and try to find a chemistry.
We had people that didn't want to be here. John Wall is now one of those people that didn't want to be here, but it's understandable. The Rockets are going through a rebuild. I'm happy he's in a situation where he can now be playing some high-level competitive basketball again. All the best moving forward to John Wall. He was a consummate professional through and through in his time in Houston. So with that, coming up, I do want to talk about the just ongoing situation in Brooklyn between Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, what the future of the Brooklyn Nets means for the future of the Rockets draft picks that they own for the next, 7 some odd years. We're going to talk about that in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at rockauto.com. Because look, with the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's basically impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you would possibly need in a traditional brick and mortar storefront, right? Why endure the often pointless and seemingly intimidating questioning like, is your car an LX or an EX? And then you have to wait while the person goes behind the counter to try to order the parts. It's just too much hassle, right? Save time and money when using rockauto.com. You can you can choose, if you want, to spend up to 30, 50, or even 100% more for the exact same parts. I don't know why you would, because you can save that amount of money when you choose rockauto.com. Best of all, they're a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers online for over 20 years. The prices are reliably low for every single customer. They've got everything that you could possibly need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even brand new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck, and be sure to write Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Be sure to visit rockauto.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, let's talk a little bit about the ongoing dumpster fire that is currently the Brooklyn Nets, just because... Sorry, I laugh just because the whole situation going on in Brooklyn is just so delightfully, just chef's kiss, because, right, you look back and to me, it's the 2020 hindsight on the James Harden trade, right? You've got people who all around the NBA media landscape dumpstered the Houston Rockets and Rafael Stone for the package centered on James Harden, right? Owning, and I think we've had enough evidence now that owning an entire franchise's picks for the next, for the better part of a decade, more or less, tends to work out pretty well, right? The last time this happened with Brooklyn, the Boston Celtics built their current core that just went 6 games in the finals. So clearly this works. And yet, so many doubters were out there saying that the Rockets didn't get a cornerstone back. They didn't get X, Y, Z, A, B, C, whatever. And now we're finally seeing the fruits of that labor start to pay off a little bit. Tari Eason being the first actual tangible piece of something to write home and say, hey, look, this is part of the Brooklyn Nets trade package, right? That pick at 17 conveyed to the Rockets this season is already way better than a lot of Rockets fans expected those picks to be in the early years of this deal, right? In the early years of this, of the trade package that came back to Houston, the early draft capital, I was expecting these picks to be anywhere from, 25 to 30 in the first round, if that, right? Because the expectation was that Brooklyn was going to be this juggernaut with James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. And yet, lo and behold, here we are in the year of 2022, so early on with when these picks are starting to convey, and we've already had one convey at pick 17, right? That pick was flirting with the lottery for a little while too. So right now, the way it looks over in Brooklyn is the situation is completely unstable. And that's great for the Rockets, right? Kyrie Irving, very, adamant that he was trying to force his way out, was trying to see if he could, maneuver a trade of some type, opt in and trade, possibly leaving just outright in free agency. Right now, it looks like he's going to opt in and, at least for the time being, stay with the Brooklyn Nets. Now, it could still be on the table that they maybe go out and try and source or find a deal where Kyrie Irving can opt into the deal and then be traded away from the Brooklyn Nets. At this point, the best case scenario would have been for Kyrie Irving to opt out completely and just walk away, and the Brooklyn Nets lose him for nothing. And it seemed like that was very legitimately a possibility on the table for Kyrie Irving to walk away completely and just go to the Lakers for the taxpayer MLE, which would have been absolutely hilarious, leaving Kevin Durant stranded with a Ben Simmons that hasn't played in an entire season. And then, how long after that before KD ultimately would have asked out. And I still don't think it's a guarantee that KD sticks around, right? KD could very easily ask for a trade. And all the rumors and reporting out of Brooklyn kind of suggest that that situation is basically a powder keg ready to blow, right? I think KD is sick and tired of the mess that's going on with Kyrie Irving, the inconsistency, all of that. And all it would take is one conversation between KD and the front office to say, yo, y'all got to get me out of here. Trade me for whatever the best package is. Here's the list of destinations that I'm down to go to. Whatever. And there are suitors out there that would line up to forfeit the next 2 or 3 of their first round draft picks to pick up Kevin Durant and have Kevin Durant for the next 2 or 3 years with whatever their current core is without having to mortgage too many important pieces. The Phoenix Suns look like a potential attractive destination just out there on the NBA landscape. They could easily, sign DeAndre Ayton and then flip DeAndre Ayton plus salary filler plus a bunch of future draft picks to the Brooklyn Nets. And then suddenly you've got a core of KD, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, plus the other pieces that they've got around them already in Phoenix. And then you just go out and find yourself like a vet minimum type center to kind of anchor that front court. But I mean, that would probably be the most attractive trade offer if you're the Brooklyn Nets versus, jettisoning KD into the sun for nothing. I don't know. But at this point, the way this impacts the Houston Rockets is right now for this upcoming season, and then it's every other season thereafter. This upcoming season is a pick swap with Brooklyn. So the Rockets have the right to swap their pick this upcoming season with Brooklyn's pick. So the only way that benefits the Rockets is if Brooklyn somehow finishes with a worse record and their pick jumps up higher than the Rockets. That's the only way that benefits the Houston Rockets. The chances of that happening are slim to none. Like, as much of a dumpster fire as Brooklyn has been, I highly doubt we're going to have a situation where their pick ultimately finishes higher than the Rockets in the lottery pecking order this next season. It would probably have to finish somewhere in that. The Rockets would have to finish with a pick somewhere around 7 or 8 for there to be maybe a remote chance that Brooklyn Nets are bad enough for the pick to actually kind of convey at that point to where the Rockets would want to swap things out. But with Kyrie Irving opting into this one final year of his deal, this actually isn't the worst case scenario, because it means that even if Kyrie sticks it out this next season and plays in Brooklyn and they have another season where they try to piece it together and Kyrie plays and maybe Ben Simmons is back and maybe KD sticks it out for one more year, that's fine, because the Rockets aren't owed the direct pick from Brooklyn this upcoming season. What really matters is going to be that 2024 pick, and that'll be when it's back on the docket where Brooklyn owes the Rockets their pick outright, completely, straight up, and that'll be the year where Kyrie potentially walks in free agency. They'll maybe have had a year of trying to test out the waters between Kyrie, Ben Simmons, and Kevin Durant, and see if that big three potentially works or if it just goes up in flames. And if it does, then that offseason could be this offseason where they all ask out, right? KD requests for a trade. Kyrie Irving walks away for nothing. Ben Simmons is unhappy. Like, the situation at hand works out really well, actually, for the Rockets, where instead of Brooklyn kind of falling apart this upcoming season, it almost prolongs things just a little bit further out to where maybe they give it one last run with KD and Kyrie this upcoming season, and then the wheels fall off the wagon completely going into the next season, which works out beautifully for the Rockets because, again, that's the season where they're owed the pick from Brooklyn completely outright. Now, I will clear up because I've had a couple people message me on social media just for asking clarification on the pick swaps via the Houston Rockets and the Brooklyn Nets, asking if things like, the future pick that the Rockets own via Milwaukee could be conveyed to, can be packaged in as part of the pick swaps or things like that. Unfortunately not. So basically the way the way the trade was consummated, the pick swaps between Brooklyn and Houston are only for picks owned by those two teams, right? It's not like the situation with the OKC pick swaps that the Rockets, as part of the CP3 Russell Westbrook trade way back in the day, where OKC actually factored in one of those picks that they owned via the Miami Heat into one of those pick swaps. Those are terms that have to be agreed upon at the time of the trade. You can't factor in picks that were acquired after the trade was made because then a team, maybe agrees to a pick swap with another organization, and then said organization A goes out and acquires another pick that would have been way worse than any of the projections during that initial deal between organizations A and B. And so again, those pick swaps only factor in the picks that were, that were available at the time of the deal being negotiated, and that were, explicitly factored into the deal as to say, okay, this pick swap involves either the Houston Rockets pick that they do own or XYZ pick that this franchise also happens to own at the time that we negotiated this deal. So I figured I would just go ahead and clear that up a little bit. I do think that, again, any level of dysfunction within that Brooklyn Nets franchise is great for the Houston Rockets. And again, I think things could come to a head sooner rather than later. We're seeing, quite a bit of buzz about, does KD want out? Is he going to request to trade? We saw the other day, Damian Lillard and Yusuf Nurkic both shared a little Photoshop of Dame and KD wearing, Blazers jerseys side by side. I think there's enough smoke out there that something could coalesce this offseason. Maybe KD is just sick of it, right? Maybe he doesn't want to try to run it back one more season. If they can't find a possible trade partner for Kyrie Irving, if there's not a hope that Ben Simmons can actually come back and they can, piece together a new look big three with those three out east. There's a lot going on over in Brooklyn, and all of it benefits the Houston Rockets, right? And right now the Rockets are in the absolute best spot, owning their draft capital for the next 5, 6, 7 years? Yeah, 6 years, right? So again, masterclass by GM Rafael Stone, who was absolutely, just blasted for it at the time of the trade. But as we remove ourselves further and further from when the trade actually happened, and we start getting to look back at it, and we start looking back at the assets accumulated from the trade, not only that, but also the decline of James Harden in conjunction with the destruction of the Brooklyn Nets, it was all just perfect by Rafael Stone. So give the man his flowers. He knows what he's doing. And now more than ever, you're starting to see people look back on the James Harden trade and say, hey, this is actually a pretty solid return because the Brooklyn Nets are falling apart at the seams. So with that, I do want to talk about KJ Martin, his situation, kind of what it looks like moving forward for his role here in Houston. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, and much, much more. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. BetOnline also remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. They've got you for MMA, boxing, golf, UFC, you name it. They've got it over at BetOnline. Right now, here's a special that they've got over at BetOnline. Who will be the NBA 2K23 cover athlete this upcoming season? Right now, Steph Curry is the odds-on favorite at plus 120. You got Ja Morant at plus 125, just a hair off from Steph Curry. And then you got Jason Tatum at plus 400, Nikola Jokic at plus 600, and then Joel Embiid at plus 650. So for all of that and more, head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline. It's where the game starts. And final segment here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little KJ Martin, because I do think it's worth noting that, first off, a little bit of reporting here from The Athletic's Kelly Iko, who did mention in a piece that dropped this Monday, I believe, that teams, including the Portland Trail Blazers and Brooklyn Nets, inquired about KJ Martin around the draft period. Houston likes Martin and believes he can still have a positive impact on the roster, but the Rockets understand the nature of the available minutes, or potential lack thereof now, with an additional 3 players drafted, plus the ultimate return of Usman Garuba. Should an adequate offer open up, Houston is open to finding a better fit for Martin elsewhere. Now, ultimately, I'd love to see KJ Martin stick around on this Rockets roster. I think that he's shown some impressive flashes. I think that he is a young, exciting role player. He's a phenomenal athlete. He's shown a ton of potential, and I think he really could be one of the better, possible 3-and-D wings in today's NBA, right? He needs to tighten up the handle a little bit more, become more comfortable attacking off the bounce. But the three ball is there, right? Like, he's worked on that 3-point shot. He's gotten incredibly consistent with that. He's great at attacking the rim when he is able to drive and elevate, or when he gets going in transition. He is a sneaky great weak side shot blocker. Obviously, we've got all the poster highlights of him like absolutely erasing Rudy Gobert at the rim, and, copious other 7-footers at the NBA level. So that said, the Rockets are at a point, right? And we've talked about this before, is they're kind of in the consolidation period of the rebuild, right? Where eventually you get put up against a wall where you've got so many enticing young prospects, and eventually you struggle to find adequate minutes for them, right? And thankfully, the Rockets are at a place now, after trading Christian Wood and after buying out John Wall, like there's only two legitimate veterans on this Rockets roster that are, conceivably going to be here at least this upcoming season, right? With, and possibly Eric Gordon could be on the way out, but it's Eric Gordon and David Nwaba, and that's it. And those two guys together combined have 20 seasons of NBA experience. David Nwaba has 6, Eric Gordon has 14. Every other player on the Rockets roster combined has 18 seasons of NBA experience, like across the rest of the roster. That's how young and inexperienced this overall Rockets roster is. So when it comes to KJ Martin, I do wonder, right? It kind of just depends on how high the organization is on him, because at this point, he looks like he's probably going to be buried a little bit further down in the depth chart. If the Rockets were to roll into the season today, right, I think their starting lineup would be some combination. There's 4 guys who are locks to be starters, and that's KPJ, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and Alperen Sengun. Those are your 4 guaranteed starters opening night NBA season 2022. That's happening. The 5th starter is a little bit more up in the air, right? If EG is still here and part of the Houston Rockets, he could very well be the 5th starter. Jae'Sean Tate could be the 5th starter if Eric Gordon gets moved, or if they just want to go with Jae'Sean Tate as the starter and bring EG off the bench. I could see either of those being viable options. And they could go completely left field. Maybe they go with somebody who's not even on the roster at this point, right? If they orchestrate a trade, if they bring in if they, ship out Eric Gordon, but they bring in another veteran presence who kind of fits that, small forward 3-and-D role, who can, kind of help anchor the starting lineup without absorbing too many overall minutes and taking away touches from the young guys in the starting lineup, then maybe that's the direction that they ultimately choose to go. But when you look at that starting lineup, and then when you look at the depth on the bench behind those guys, where will KJ Martin get the majority of his minutes, right? If you're expecting Usman Garuba to absorb some minutes at the backup 5, if you're expecting Jae'Sean Tate to also absorb some minutes at the backup 4 to kind of be, playing small ball 4 occasionally, right? Where are you going to get minutes for Tari Eason? Do you factor in Garrison Matthews into things right here? Because even though Garrison Matthews doesn't play necessarily the same position as KJ Martin, if you plug Garrison Matthews into the lineup, then you've got to start shifting guys further up in the lineup. Guys like Jae'Sean Tate and KJ Martin start absorbing more minutes at the 4. But if you're going to be getting Jabari Smith Jr. 30 plus minutes a night at that 4 spot, like where do these minutes ultimately come from? And if I'm the Rockets, I don't probably feel comfortable that you can get KJ Martin, a consistent 15 to 20 minutes a night, given all these other pieces that you've got in play. And that's not even to mention the fact that the Rockets have a ton of guard play now between KPJ, Jalen Green, possibly still Eric Gordon, Josh Christopher, Daishen Nix, and now Ty Washington. So we already saw last season where the Rockets went pretty guard heavy in a lot of lineups, obviously running a lot of Eric Gordon alongside Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., effectively using Eric Gordon as a wing, not as a guard, so to speak. And maybe they go that route again this season. But what that does, right, if you're slotting in multiple guards into the rotation and playing up at the 1, 2, and 3 spots on the floor, then it pushes other guys further up in the rotation to where guys like Jae'Sean Tate and KJ Martin have to play the 4 spot or have to play small ball 5. And there's only so many minutes to go around at those positions. If you're expecting Alperen Sengun to get 28 to 32 minutes a night at the 5 spot, Jabari Smith 28 to 30-something minutes at the 4 spot, Tari Eason to hopefully get 10 to 12 minutes a night at minimum so that he can kind of get up to speed. This is also why the G League really helps out, right? This is also why the Rockets sent Josh Christopher and Usman Garuba down to the G League for extended periods at the start of last season so they could actually get reps and not just be riding the pine and not actually playing consistent basketball minutes so that they could refine their game a little bit. I fully expect that to happen to probably Ty Washington, maybe even Tari Eason, honestly. Like, all things considered, with where the Rockets are at with their overall depth chart, kind of depends on how the rest of the Rockets roster shakes out. But at this point, KJ Martin doesn't have a guaranteed spot. And while he's shown some serious flashes, he hasn't shown enough to where you'd feel comfortable saying, you know what? All right, he absolutely deserves this spot over XYZ player, right? Going into training camp, if he's still on the roster, he'll have every chance to fight for a spot further up in the rotation, and maybe he impresses, right? I definitely was advocating on behalf of KJ Martin starting in place of Jae'Sean Tate to round out the season because KJ Martin has clearly worked on his three ball, and that is something that Jae'Sean Tate has absolutely struggled with. But if the reports are to be believed that Jae'Sean Tate has a newly revamped three ball, if Jae'Sean Tate is shooting 35% or higher from three, then make him the de facto starter, because everything else he gives you at 6'4", the defense, the size, the intensity on defense, the playmaking, all of that at the small forward spot is perfect, right? So at that point, I don't think KJ Martin holds a candle to what Jae'Sean Tate brings to the table. But if Jae'Sean Tate still can't shoot the ball next season, then there's a legitimate argument between those two guys as far as prospects go. Which I should mention, on the Jae'Sean Tate front, the Rockets did pick up his team option. That's like, it was going to happen. I tucked this away in like minute 30 something of the podcast, but it wasn't exactly breaking news. The Rockets were going to hold on to Jae'Sean Tate and continue to see what they have with him. But as it stands right now, I think KJ Martin has garnered enough interest from other teams that the Rockets are going to be open to accepting phone calls, and it's not going to break my heart if they move on from him, because again, this is the thing about a rebuild, is you can't become like too attached to these players, right? He's shown some flashes. He's absolutely shown some potential, but he hasn't, cemented himself into the Rockets rotation. And now that they're bringing other bigs, other wings, guys with a bit more size, a bit more maybe versatility, better skill sets to the table, guys like Tari Eason and Jabari Smith, then it does kind of crowd things in that front court for KJ Martin to realistically have a shot, right? Maybe if his handle had progressed a little bit more to this point, maybe if he became a little bit better of a defender to this point, then he'd have a better shot as to, kind of having an argument for that starting three spot, instead of Jae'Sean Tate or instead of Eric Gordon moving forward this next season. Again, I'm talking about it like KJ Martin's already out the door, but the fact that he's already approached the Rockets front office about it, and the fact that he's got his dad, Kenyon Martin Sr., chirping in his ear about he deserves a bigger role, he deserves to be somewhere where he can be a focal point, whatever, that could ultimately be his undoing as a player, right? Is, having a former NBA player, a dad, a father who, is, wants the best for his son, absolutely, but is, giving him bad advice along the way, right? KJ Martin's in a great situation with the Rockets. He's on a great, exciting, up-and-coming young team. He has the chance to grow and be a part of something special moving forward, and instead, he's trying to jumpstart that and go find like a concrete role somewhere else when he just hasn't flashed that level of consistency in his play quite just yet. I don't know, man. Again, I said stay in your lane, like when I was first discussing it, when the first news came out that KJ Martin wanted out, or was at least having discussions with the Rockets front office about it. And that's kind of still how I feel about it. Like, you're 2 years into the league. You haven't like cemented yourself as a guaranteed rotational player in the NBA by any stretch of the imagination. And yet you're unhappy with your minutes. Like, it's a little bit of a head scratcher there. But with that, if the Rockets can, recoup an additional future first-round draft pick or something for KJ Martin, at this point, I'm kind of all for it, because there are a glut of minutes now that the Rockets are going to have to allocate for all these young guys moving forward on the roster, and having another liquid asset in the cupboard of assets the Rockets have would be a huge get if they can get that for KJ Martin. So with that, those are final thoughts from today's episode. Appreciate you for checking out the show. As always, if you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, the brand new Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. How do you feel about John Wall being bought out from the Houston Rockets? Are you going to root for John Wall as an LA Clipper? And let me know your favorite memory of John Wall as a Houston Rocket. This is probably my favorite memory of John Wall as a Houston Rocket.
team wasn't where we wanted to be, and I mean, we had people that didn't want to be here, so it's kind of hard to play through that and try to find a chemistry.
Had to run that back one more time here at the end of the episode. But with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.